feel suffocated by the tar of black rage, a destructive distillation of privilege and supremacy and violence and inequity. Its thickness plastered against my skin, seeping through the tightness of my pores. Its blackness camouflaging itself to my likeness. Its blackness becoming part of who I am, a black woman in consciousness, in rage, in race. The sinews of thighs running towards something more, towards freedom, towards fight, towards flight. Like Ahmaud, like Freddie. Gray trusted his own instincts the way that we are told not to. Because in this skin, we don't own our own movement. Hands up, lay down, drop the weapon. Armed in blackness. A threat too vile to let loose, a target too easy to not shoot. When his spine snapped, Freddie Gray became kindling. The movement of his neck was one of inquiry, one of commas, bent into question marks. This is a poem for Freddie Gray. This is a poem for George Floyd. This is the same damn poem. Again, revisited, revised. Written in the cursive of protest, written in bold, underlined, annotated, and reported to another news outlet. This is the spirit of Jennifer Lewis and the softness of piano keys behind a reverberating palette. Take your knee and your privilege off my neck. Take your nasty knee off our necks. We are sick of being ridden upon. Take this tar, take this rage and destroy their tracks. Burn it down to the core. And if nothing else, some transcendent revolutionary art will come from this. And if nothing else, some black revolution will come from this on this filthy, corrupt, unjust American street. I won't wash the pavement with tears or avoid stepping on the cracks of your fragility. So that not when I come to die, discover that I had not lived, did not love, did not fight, did not pretend that this were the exception. This poem is called The Transcendental Gospel of Freddie Gray and Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd, and the long list of names that is too long to fit into a title. This poem was inspired by the poem The Transcendental Gospel of Freddie Gray, which was written by Brian Mooney in 2015. Mooney wrote this poem right after the death of Freddie Gray in Baltimore, Maryland. And I've been teaching this poem for about 4 years. I kind of stumbled upon it in 2016, and it's saddening and sobering that the message, the content is still very relevant today in 2020. I initially started teaching the Transcendental Gospel of Freddie Gray because I wanted to connect my curriculum to something real, something relevant, something important, to events that were happening in society, to things that we needed to discuss politically. And as a teacher of 11th graders, juniors, American literature, it was easy to connect the Transcendental Gospel of Freddie Gray to the transcendental literary time period of America. So those allusions and references that Mooney makes to Thoreau, Henry David Thoreau's Walden, was a great tool for me to use to teach the literary time period, but also to teach about injustice that was and still is happening in America. So this poem, with the title of Brian's poem within the title that I've chosen, is just an inspiration from Brian Mooney, but also inspired by what has recently happened to both Ahmaud Arbery and also to George Floyd. Hey, good folks. So I think that this poem could, of course, be read and understood by itself, but I think it's even better understood by first reading about what has happened to George Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor, most recently, right? But then also the very, very long list of Black people who have been brutalized and murdered at the hands of police officers. I think it's also important or helpful to read Brian Mooney's poem, The Transcendental Gospel of Freddie Gray, to understand and see the parallels between the two poems, and then also to have some kind of background knowledge of the Transcendental time period, and in reading or thinking about excerpts from Ralph Waldo Emerson's Nature, Self-Reliance, and also Henry David Thoreau's Walden, specifically Where I Lived, which is where I took some of the quotes from, because these are texts that I have been teaching for quite some time. So I drew inspiration from each of these, and then of course I quoted two other influential people, I would say. One of them was Ibi Zoboi, who is the author of American Street, and the other was Jennifer Lewis, who is an actress and just so powerful in the Black community. And so these things are important. So in hearing the poem and just watching me kind of recite the poem, but in also reading the poem, maybe like just actually looking at the words of the poem, it's easy to understand what's going on just kind of in the context of what we're dealing with in America, but then even more so as far as analysis. I think it's also maybe not important, but it's useful, I would say, to have those other histories or knowledge of these things that I was inspired by.